Welcome to the Live Big podcast, where real estate expert Nick Paynes shows you that everyone can build wealth through real estate investing. Nick and his featured guests will give you the tools, resources, and expert information you need to leverage real estate into a wealth-building strategy, so you can stop worrying about your 9-to-5 and start to live big. Here's Nick with today's episode.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Live Big podcast. Great to have you back on another episode. Today, we're going to chat a little bit about location. Many of you have heard before the adage of location when it comes to real estate. And so we're going to talk about that and how to evaluate your location and what things to look for and why it matters. So we will get right into it today and talk about, we're going to start basically with the importance of location in real estate investing. And then we're going to get into maybe some tips and some tricks in choosing the right location for your investments. So, but the reality is that location directly impacts your property value, your rental income potential, the demand, and just really the overall success of your real estate investment. So let's talk a little bit about it. So let's talk about first your property value. So obviously the location of a property significantly influences its market value, and desirable areas like places with good schools, low crime rates, and proximity to amenities could be what we call a walk score. Often are going to command higher prices, right? So, and then obviously, less desirable areas will have lower property values. As far as crime rates and things like that are concerned, one of the resources that you can use is a website called familywatchdog.us. There is this website. I should say showcases. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but highlights like sex offenders in the area. So maybe don't go check that out for your own address if you don't want to know. But it has basically a whole map of where registered sex offenders live, and gives you an idea of, if you might be buying a property right next door to a sex offender, which might make it difficult to rent to a family or something like that. So not a bad idea to check some of those things out. So one quick side note with property value is understand that when you're buying a property, I always think it's somewhat relative. So if we're worried about resale value and looking at like how much the property is going to sell for down the road due to location, one of the things I think about is, well, you might be selling it for less on the back end, but you might be acquiring it for less on the front end, right? So you're going to get a good deal on the front end, which means you're probably going to have to give a good deal on the back end. So it's all kind of relative. So same type of thing with a really good location. You might pay a premium to be at a really good location now, but you're also going to receive a premium when you sell that property. So rental income. So the location, just like the property value, the location determines the rental income potential of an investment property as well. So obviously rentals in prime locations tend to attract higher quality tenants, and they're willing to pay more rent and have the ability to pay more rent. So for example, here in Colorado, you could maybe find a 3-bedroom, 2-bath property in Brighton, Colorado, one of the suburbs, and maybe you're paying $2,000, $2,200 a month, where you might pay $2,200 per month for a 1-bedroom, maybe even a studio if you're in downtown Denver, right? Of equal quality. So the difference here is your obviously your rental income because of the desirability of location of your particular property. So the third one is appreciation potential. So obviously certain locations experience significant property value appreciation over time and others do not. It's one of the things that we've talked about nationwide investing, where Colorado's not a great cash flow state, but we're a great appreciation state. So there's great cash flow opportunities that exist in places in the Midwest, places like Detroit, Cleveland, things like that. Some of the states in the South, Missouri, things like that, offer great great cash flow opportunities, but there's not a whole lot of overall return from an appreciation standpoint. So again, depending on what you're looking for, depending on what your real estate goals are, that may depend upon where you or determine where you invest. Okay. Property demand. So property demand for the demand for rental properties and just homes in general for sale, they vary by location, right? So if you're investing in areas with high demand, then that can lead to quicker property turnover and reduce vacancy rates, right? So if you're in an area where you're not having to worry about finding another renter because it's highly desirable, you're not going to have to worry about your vacancy rates quite as much there. Also, just think about location-wise in terms of vacancy rates. Think about location-wise, for example, if you're in like a college town, for example, your turnover is probably going to be every couple of years, right? You're going to have students renting, and as they graduate and leave, every couple of years, you're going to be turning people over, turning tenants over. So in the suburbs, we don't deal with that as much. We might rent to a family, and they may stay there, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, 15 years. So you don't have as much vacancy, you don't have as much turnover, maybe being in the suburbs versus being somewhere like a college town. Okay. This one's a big one. The next one's a big one. Property liquidity. This is one thing I talk about when I'm working with a client. I'm helping them buy, whether it's their first home, a rental property. It's kind of all relevant when it comes to buying a piece of property, regardless of investment or personal use. But property liquidity is really important. So some locations offer better liquidity, meaning that, if you're in a really high seller's market, your house can be almost anywhere, and it's you're not going to have a problem selling it. So, back in 2021, 2022, even 2020, when we were really low in inventory, it didn't matter if your property, back to a major street. It didn't matter if you were right up next to a school or, back to railroad tracks. Like, those properties were selling because there were no other options for people who wanted to buy. However, when it comes to actually liquidating that property or selling that property down the road, those issues or those characteristics of that property can become, significant issues when you're trying to get rid of that property. So, and sometimes it's to the point not where it's like, well, we can just keep reducing the price until it sells. There's actually a point where, if we're in a strong enough buyer's market where there's lots of homes available, it's almost to the point where the property's unsellable, right? So if you've got a property that backs to the highway or something like that, the property might be almost unsellable because they have so many other options to be internal in the neighborhood, not backing to a major street for a very reasonable price point. So property liquidity is really important. You may not think about that as much when you're buying, but I think it is important to think down the road, okay, when I go to sell this, is this going to be an easy or a difficult property to sell? So risk factors. So risk factors, again, buying a property in Tornado Alley, buying a property in Hurricane Alley, think about those things. Think about when you're making an investment, what type of, especially, hazards are you going to be dealing with in your particular location? So in Colorado, we deal with a lot of hail. Obviously, in some of the states in central United States, we deal with a lot of tornadoes. The Carolinas, Florida, some parts of Texas, we deal with hurricanes, right? So what's your risk factor there? Are you going to be in a flood zone? Are you going to be in a flood prone area? Those are some things to start to think about as well. And then, crime ridden type areas, right? Those are going to pose kind of, higher risks as well, which goes into that, kind of the first thing that we talked about as far as property value being determined by the nice areas. So anyway, think about your risk factors. Think about the things that, you could be taking on when you purchase the property. So those are kind of the main components of the importance of location and maybe the things that might impact the price or the rental amount for a property that you might purchase. Let's transition and talk a little bit about tips for choosing the right location for your investments. So I think the first thing to do is, and I do this with every client, it's almost the first thing that we always do, which is define your investment goals, right? So we have a full episode on this, on figuring out what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Are you looking for cash flow? Are you looking for long-term appreciation? Are you looking for a tax shelter? What is it that you're looking for? That's going to influence your overall location. And more, that one's going to influence more your overall location versus your hyper location, right? So like I said, if you're looking for cash flow, just Colorado in general is not a great place to be. If you get hyper local, sure, there's better places for cash flow than others. There's higher cap rates in some areas of Colorado than there are in other areas. So, but realistically speaking, there's nowhere in Colorado that's going to have better cash flow than like Cleveland or Detroit, right? These are areas that have tremendous cash flow, but have lower appreciation potential. Okay. So defining those investment goals will give you, the essentially underlying basis of where we should start. If we're trying to cash flow, we need to purchase out of state, out of Colorado. Okay. So your second piece is your market research. So you should be doing market research to identify areas that have really strong like economic fundamentals. So this could be population growth, job opportunities, it could be like just an overall diverse like local economy. And really what we're looking for is looking for cities or regions with stable or increasing demand for housing. So we want to see more people coming into the area than we do seeing people leave the area. I think in one of my earlier podcasts, we talked about a resource that, and it's escaping me right now, I apologize, but there's a resource that you can go into and see a lot of these economic trends in whatever city that you may choose. Hey, what does the population look like over the last 10 years? Is it growing? Is it decreasing? This is a lot more important when we're talking about multifamily investing, purchasing apartment buildings, things like that, because so much of it depends. We don't just need to fill one rental. We need to fill 200. So do we have the amount of people that we need for that to happen? Do we have the available jobs in the area to make that happen and to attract people in? So your market research on the particular location that you're looking to buy is really important. Once you do the overall market research, narrowing it down to more of like a hyper-local neighborhood analysis, again, is another piece. So you may say, hey, I want to live in Westminster, Colorado, or I want to have a property in Westminster, Colorado. Well, Westminster has very different neighborhoods. So you could live in North Westminster and be surrounded by $1 million homes, or you could live in South Westminster, homes built in the 1960s, 1960,000 square foot brick ranches that back up to the highway. So very different demographic, very different dynamic, and very different neighborhoods, right? So you're going to want to look at a neighborhood analysis, and again, examine factors such as crime rates, school quality, because at least in Colorado, you could be in one neighborhood and have a set of schools, and the very next neighborhood over might be a completely different set of schools, and it might even be a completely different district. School district, right? So Westminster has that. For example, there's a neighborhood, right? I actually used to live in a Westminster neighborhood that basically our neighborhood was in this little pocket of a school district that was a very low rated school district, but the neighborhood was very nice. And so those are factors that we want to look at on a very hyper local market. So the next one that you might look at might be something, and this is more of a risk-taking factor from a long-term investment, but the gentrification potential, right? So the idea that in 10 years, this area might look a whole lot different. People might start buying up land and building, big, beautiful homes and multi-units and duplexes and quadplexes. So gentrification potential. So in Colorado, we've seen a lot of gentrification over the last 10 to 15 years in areas like Sloan's Lake and the Highlands and Lodo and all these different areas of Denver where, it used to be a place you wanted to avoid like crazy. And now there's, craft breweries and, high dollar shopping all over the place. Right. And so, and homes in those areas have become very expensive. So we've seen properties that were selling for, 25 years ago, we're selling for less than $100,000 are now $1 million properties. due to the gentrification and the land potential that has affected those maybe even old, decrepit properties that are still sitting there. The land is so valuable. So trying to guess the gentrification potential of a particular area, I think is kind of a fool's game. But I also think, if you land it right, it can be extremely beneficial and lucrative for you. So there are a couple areas in the Denver metro area that some people think are going to be the next up and coming area of Denver, and they're making their bets on the gentrification in those areas. So that can create substantial property appreciation over time, and so that can be a factor as well. One of the other things to do is get with your local economic development. You could, like, if you're in the city of Westminster, there's going to be an economic development committee. In the city of Broomfield, there's going to be an economic development committee, and figure out what the future development plans are. So do they have any municipal plans or infrastructure plans to build more shopping or jobs? Are there any big companies coming in, Amazon coming in, that's going to offer 10 or 15,000 new jobs? Are they putting in new highways, public transportation expansion? Are they doing any commercial developments, big apartment buildings or complexes? Those are all indicators of future growth and increased property values. Okay. Local amenities, right? So evaluate the availability of amenities like parks, recreational facilities, could be cultural attractions, and these are going to be more appealing for potential tenants and people to buy homes, right? Obviously, we've already talked about in the importance location, tips in choosing the right property. Again, evaluating school districts. So try to get yourself into a good school district, both for your tenants and your tenants' kids, and for the future sale of the property. It's going to help with resale. Local employment opportunities. So again, consider the availability of jobs in the job market. Do you have a lot of tech jobs nearby? Do you have jobs that require people to go in, where commuting is going to be a big factor? Are a lot of the jobs in the area remote? Okay, all those things can be an important factor in determining where you want to purchase a property. We already talked about crime rates and how that deters tenants and buyers. So make sure you're checking your local crime rates. And then just overall, like, affordability, right? So balance your kind of investment budget with the cost of properties in your chosen location, right? So I think it depends on your goals, but I know, like, me personally, I try to find, I set a budget and I set a location, and then I just try to find the nicest property I can find for that budget. Some people like to do like more of a small renovation and put in a little bit of sweat equity. I just personally don't want to go through that work. And so the reality is, for me, is I'm looking for the nicest property that my money can buy in that particular area. So establish what you're doing as far as affordability is concerned, and try to avoid overstretching finances and things like that. So, and then diversification. I think the last piece is consider diversifying your portfolio across some different locations, and across potentially property types. So, a couple properties in one location, another property. And what it does is, you, instead of going boom or bust and buying all your properties in one neighborhood that you think is going to be the next big gentrification, if it doesn't happen and it becomes a bust, you put all your eggs in one basket. But if you bought one property in there and then one or two or three properties, in surrounding areas, maybe you have one boom when it does go nuts, and you may look back and go, man, I wish I would have bought more property in there. But at the same time, the negative, I think, outweighs the positive if it doesn't become a booming area. So, maybe you pick it right on one of your properties, and that's great. Consider that a win. So again, I think just kind of diversifying your property locations throughout maybe your local metro area that you like to be either invested in, or that you're local to because you like to manage your own properties or something like that. I think that's very important. So, again, the big thing, the big takeaway here is understanding that the proper location for your real estate investments it kind of requires some careful research and an understanding of your investment goals, right? So once you have a good understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, you can do the proper research to make sure that you're where you want to be. And remember that there's no right or wrong in terms of location, right? That varies based on your personal preferences, your objectives, those investment goals. There isn't right or wrong, right? So there are some really quote unquote terrible properties out there, but man, if they're terrible properties here in Denver, they might be a good cash flow property, right? They might back to a railroad. They might be, just a very undesirable place for a homeowner. But what that means is you're going to acquire it at a great price. You might get great cash flow on it. And when you sell it, you may not get a great price either. But in the meantime, while you own the property, you'd have great cash flow. So it really just depends on your personal investment goals, right? So just make sure that you're aligning your choices with whatever your specific investment strategy is. So, that is it for today's episode. I hope that was helpful and that you learned something about the location of your property and the location, the importance of location in your property. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out, contact us through our website. In the meantime, it's a beautiful September day. Well, it's September now that I'm recording it, but it'll be October when you hear this. I'm sure it's a beautiful October day as well. And so go out, make it a great day, and live big.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Live Big podcast. For even more real estate and investment resources, go to blackyetigroup.com/resources and download Nick's complete guide to running your own rental properties. Tune back in next week for another episode, and until then, live big.
Live Big does not provide investment, legal, or tax advice, and nothing herein should be construed as being financial, legal, tax, or other advice. Live Big does not represent that any securities or services discussed are suitable for any investor. No investment or other decision should be made solely based on the contents or information found on the website or podcast. When making a decision about your investments, you should seek the advice of a professional financial advisor or qualified expert.